things.
To summarize the previous part of this look at Justice League, I had very mixed opinions towards the 2017 theatrical cut. I found its plot to be very skeletal, tonally inconsistent, and lacking in character development, with certain moments that felt very out of place for some members of the cast, especially Batman and Cyborg. I felt like it would have been a better film if it were delayed, either to give Snyder time to grieve and later return to complete his version, or for Whedon to completely revamp the film to his vision. On a minor note, it really irked me that Superman didn't join the battle with the black suit like when he was revived in the comics, but I'll let that slide. After the theatrical cut was released, I hoped and prayed for an extended cut that would address the problems I had with the film, adding more character development, a consistent tone, and the plot holes filled in, along with Superman's black suit that should have been in the final product. Thankfully, that desired cut finally arrived in 2021 with the release of Zack Snyder's Justice League, better known as the Snyder Cut. This begs the question, however, is this cut of Justice League everything us fans hoped for and more, or is it still very rough around the edges? I will say before we begin this discussion that there will be minor spoilers, so I would suggest watching the film first and then taking a look at this video. However, if you have seen the Snyder Cut, then feel free to proceed onward. Essentially, if you've seen the previous cut, then you basically know the plot of this one, since it is essentially the same story, albeit with some extended sequences to flesh out the story, for better or for worse. Thankfully, we finally get that character development the original version desperately needed, especially for Cyborg and Barry, the former now being a bigger focus this time around. Batman also feels more accurate to his comic counterpart and more in line with the portrayal in Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. So no more uncharacteristically comedic moments, though he does crack a few jokes here and there that do feel true to Bruce Wayne. We are also given a more fleshed out Steppenwolf that actually looks and feels like a threat this time around, and finally given a look at this version of Darkseid, who acts as a Thanos-like presence throughout the film to set up sequels that are honestly up in the air at this point, and honestly might not happen anytime soon. I'm sorry, but I don't think the SnyderVerse is going to be restored for quite a while, if ever. I think that ship has sailed and the DCEU has since moved in a much different direction, but I digress and will be coming back to this later, so sit tight. Thankfully, there also isn't a random Russian family shoehorned into the plot for a few nice-looking action sequences, and the focus is purely kept on this band of six and their battle against the forces of Apocalypse. Speaking of BVS, this version of Justice League feels more like a continuation of that than the theatrical cut in terms of tone and story, continuing the saga Zack Snyder envisioned and giving us hints of what could have been for his DCEU as a whole. We even get to see that amazing black suit Superman in action, albeit for a brief moment. Honestly, I wish this is what we got in theaters back in 2017, instead of the bare-bones film that was released, since it addressed almost all of its flaws. You'd probably think with all the praise I'm giving this film that I think it's absolutely flawless, and I respond to that with a massive no. Even though this cut of Justice League is a massive improvement over its theatrical cut, there are still some flaws that need to be addressed. The first being its overall runtime. I understand it is almost impossible to tell an epic story without going over a 2-hour runtime. However, in my opinion, I think a movie is really pushing it if it goes over the 3-hour mark. Looking at you, Avengers Endgame, and no movie under any circumstances should be over 4 hours long, especially this one. I understand that Snyder had a very specific vision in mind and wanted to convey that as much as possible, but this cut is way too long for its own good. Some scenes could have been cut and trimmed down with little consequence on the plot, and he was pushing it a bit with the excessive amount of slow motion sequences, especially the opening recapping the end of BVS, which I'll admit was also a pretty nice way to get us up to speed. While I do appreciate the improvements to the storyline and the more consistent tone, it still has a similar problem to its theatrical cut in terms of pacing. Like the previous attempt, there were some scenes that went so fast it was hard to digest what was going on, while some also dragged endlessly. This is why I believe it should have spent more time in the editing room before release. Had that been achieved, I feel it would have received a more manageable runtime with a story that flows more easily as well. Speaking of certain scenes, however, I was surprised to discover that some from the theatrical cut I initially thought were Whedon's reshoots were shot before Snyder left the project in 2017. You could say that discovery alone actually gave me a greater appreciation for the theatrical cut, since it seems they were at least making a solid effort to retain Snyder's vision despite the rushed effects, skeletal plot, and executive interference. What you're essentially seeing here is Snyder's full, unabridged version of Justice League's story, similar to how the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2 and BVS's Ultimate Edition was approached. By the way, if you would like me to compare the two cuts of those films like I'm doing here, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. We're given the story with a majority of the plot holes thankfully filled in, a more cohesive story, a consistent tone, and better character development, at the cost of solid pacing. It simply shows us an alternative and better take on the story, basically what could have been had Snyder been allowed to complete his take on the DCEU, if you will. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going any further with the SnyderVerse from this one. DC's films have already moved in a much different direction, filled with more humor, they're colorful, and much easier to watch, focusing more on telling a good story than keeping in continuity. Maybe we'll get a further look at Snyder's take in the upcoming Flash movie, since it seems to be an adaptation of Flashpoint and Crisis. But I think that's pretty much it, and even then, I really wouldn't hold my breath, guys. This is pretty much a one and done type of deal, and it was an amazing glimpse into Snyder's DCEU swan song. All in all, if given a choice between this and the theatrical cut of Justice League, I would highly recommend the Snyder version in a heartbeat. It's more in line with the director's previous entries in this franchise, has a more consistent tone, fleshed out storyline, a well-rounded villain, and much better VFX. On the other hand, it suffers from an excessively long runtime, a cliffhanger that goes absolutely nowhere, and the inconsistent pacing that carried on from the theatrical cut. Snyder, you seriously need to work on pacing in your films. This is starting to become a problem with your work as a whole, not just that involving DC. But I digress once again. What did you think of Zack Snyder's Justice League? Do you prefer this cut or the other one? Also, even though I don't think the SnyderVerse will be restored, do you think it will? Let me know in the comments below, and please be sure to give a thumbs up, share, and subscribe if you liked my content. Also, before I go, I would like to give a huge thanks to everyone in the past year or so for helping me to reach over 100 subscribers. I always appreciate your support, and I always enjoy reading all your comments on my videos and seeing your ideas for future ones. From the bottom of my heart, thank you all so much, and let's keep the AMM Squared train rolling for as long as possible.